Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So alhamdulillah, yesterday we started a series, inshallah, for the 40 hadith collection on Masjid Al-Aqsa. And inshallah, we plan to finish this collection before Eid, inshallah ta'ala. Now, before we begin with the next hadith, I just wanted to make a clarification. Yesterday, I was asked some questions after the talk, and when the first hadith actually that we talked about, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked by Abu Dharr radhiyallahu anhu, he says that Ayyu masjidin wudiya awwal, which masjid was built first? And Rasulullah said Al-Masjid Al-Haram, and then Abu Dharr said Thumma ay, and then which masjid? And Rasulullah responded by saying Thumma Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. After that was Masjid Al-Aqsa. So I talked about how Ibrahim alayhi salam built the Kaaba with Ismail alayhi salam, and then in Jerusalem he built Masjid Al-Aqsa with his other son Ishaq alayhi salam. Now, what I wanted to clarify is actually there's two opinions about this. One of the things is that what this is referring to is the first foundations of the Masjid of Kaaba, Haram in Makkah Mukarramah, and then Masjid Aqsa, which they say that some ulama say that, for example, Adam alayhi salam, as he was the one. Some ulama say that Adam alayhi salam laid the foundation of the Kaaba. Some say the angels laid the foundation for the Kaaba. And according to that opinion, who say Adam alayhi salam laid the foundations, they also say, in accordance to this hadith, that this is talking about Adam alayhi salam also laying the foundation for Masjid Aqsa in Jerusalem 40 years after he laid the foundation of Masjid Al-Haram and the Kaaba. According to other scholars, they say that the foundations, yes, we know the foundations were laid either by the angels or Adam alayhi salam. But Ibrahim alayhi salam was the one, and that's in the Quran. That's what I was referring to. He raised the foundation. He built the actual structure of the Kaaba, was built by Ibrahim alayhi salam and his son Ismail alayhi salam. And then 40 years later, with Ishaq alayhi salam, he raised the foundations of Masjid Aqsa, or built the structure of Masjid Aqsa. Also, we know that Masjid Aqsa was built many times, multiple times over history. It was, the building was destroyed from rain, from whatnot, and then it was rebuilt by different prophets. For example, Sulaiman alayhi salam, when he built the Temple Mount, the masjid, that's also Masjid Aqsa, he rebuilt it, and then after a while it was also destroyed by the Christian kings afterwards. So it has a long history of building and reconstructing. So I just wanted to make that clear, inshallah. Okay, so we talked about the first masjid being built. We talked about the etiquettes of the two qiblas. What was that? What was the thing about using the bathroom that we mentioned yesterday? Yes? So we can't face the qiblas, okay, when we are using the bathroom. It's against adab, it's against etiquette of the qiblas to face them when relieving ourselves. Also, we talked about the first qibla being Jerusalem, where the Prophet ﷺ, when he after Isra wal Mi'raj, the first qibla was Masjid Aqsa towards Jerusalem, and that was 16 to 18 months. Different hadith, 16 to 70, 16 to 18 months, where they prayed towards Jerusalem. And then in Medina Munawwara, one of the hadith mentioned 2 months after the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah to Medina Munawwara, the tahweel of qibla took place. And we talked about the masjid itself, Masjid Qiblatain in Medina Munawwara, where the Prophet ﷺ was praying in when the tahweel of qibla took place. Also, we talked about the last hadith that we talked about was the Hawd of the Prophet ﷺ, the Kawthar, Hawd of Kawthar, which is the distance between Makkah and Jerusalem. So that distance is about a month's journey Prophet mentioned in the hadith about a month's journey. In another hadith, he says it's about a month's journey, and it's between the Kaaba and Jerusalem. And we talked about how the size of it, and then the number of the vessels, and where people will be given to drink. So Rasulullah with his own blessed hands, who will be serving the Muslims, serving the people, the believers, they will go and drink from the blessed hands of the Prophet on the Day of Judgment. And I think I talked about this when I was doing Isra wal Mi'raj. I talked about the hadith where the Prophet on the Day of Judgment, there will be people coming forward, and the Prophet will go forward to greet them, recognizing them that they're from his ummah. But then the angels will come and make a barrier between them. They will not allow them to come further. So Rasulullah will ask that these are from my ummah, let them pass. Why are you stopping them? And the angels will say that you don't know what they did after you. That they were changing the deen, they did things after you, and the way they left the deen, because of that they are barred from that. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from being one of those who are barred from meeting Rasulullah and drinking from his blessed hands, inshallah, on the Day of Judgment. The next hadith, inshallah, hadith number 6. عن أنس رضي الله عنه قال لم يبقى ممن صلى القبلتين غيري. So this is in Sahih Bukhari, and this is an authority, Anas ibn Malik radhiyallahu anhu. He's the one narrating the hadith. He's the one. It's his words, and he says, "Lam yabqa mimman salla al-qiblatain ghayri." There's no one left from those who prayed towards the two qiblatain, two qiblas, except for me. Now we know Anas ibn Malik radhiyallahu anhu, his history. He was very young. He was 10 years old actually when the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah to Medina Munawwara, and his mother, she brought Anas ibn Malik radhiyallahu anhu to Rasulullah ﷺ and said, basically, he is your servant now. I'm giving him as a servant to you to serve you and learn from you. She wanted him to learn from the etiquettes and learn deen and learn Islam from Rasulullah ﷺ. So Anas ibn Malik went into the service of the Prophet ﷺ from the age of 10 years old and until the Prophet ﷺ passed. So Anas ibn Malik was how old when Rasulullah ﷺ passed away? No, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. Prophet ﷺ was 63, yes. But Anas ibn Malik, he was 10 when the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah. And how many years after did the Prophet ﷺ pass away, after hijrah? It's close, very close. I'm sorry, you said? 20 years old. Barakallahu feek. So 10 years in, 13 was in Makkah. Barakallahu feek. Yeah, so 30 in Makkah, 10 in Medina Munawwara. So Anas ibn Malik was very young. He was 20 years old. And actually I talked about that 2 Mondays ago. When the Prophet made hijrah to Medina Munawwara, Anas ibn Malik, he narrates, he says that I haven't seen any day better than and more beautiful than the day when the Prophet entered into Medina Munawwara. And he says that everything shined with the light, the illumination of Rasulullah. He was like the moon that came and it lit up everything basically. And Anas ibn Malik, he also says, I haven't seen any day worse than the day when the Prophet passed away. That everything became dark. And he said that even when we went to bury the Prophet, we came back, we hadn't even wiped off the dust from our hands, from the grave of the Prophet, except that we saw a change in our hearts already. We felt that the Prophet has left, so our iman level went down already. So Anas ibn Malik, 20 years old when the Prophet passed away. So like I was saying, he was 10 years old when he started serving the Prophet. And if you look at the narrations of Anas ibn Malik, a beautiful explanation. And this is something like, when looking at our personal lives, our parents, our siblings, our children, our wives, they can tell us who we are. They know who we are, inside and out, right? We live with them every day. They know our secrets. They know everything about us. Now, we might put on a facade outside, we put on a face for the people outside, but when we go home, our wives, our children, they know us in and out. So Anas ibn Malik he was basically like a child of the Prophet, with him all the time, serving him. And Anas ibn Malik, if you look at the narrations, he says that the Prophet, I served him for 10 years, he never once said uff. that if I did something wrong, he never got upset with me. He never hit me. He never got upset. He never even said. And there's one narration actually where Anas bin Malik was asked by the Prophet to go and fulfill some errand. And Anas bin Malik, being a young boy, he goes out, he found his friends playing in the street. So he joins them, starts playing in the street with them. And Rasulullah was waiting for him to return. He's not coming back. So Rasulullah goes out to search, like, is he okay? Everything okay? Why didn't he come back yet? And Rasulullah finds him playing in the street with his friends. So Rasulullah actually comes up behind him, and he lovingly takes his ear. I've heard the ulama say he took his ear and he lightly twisted it, not hard or anything like that, just twisted it. And Anas ibn Malik, when he turns around, he sees the Prophet standing over him, smiling. And then he says, I once remembered the errand I was supposed to do, so I ran to go fulfill the errand. So we see again the akhlaq of the Prophet inside his home and outside his home. And like the ulama say, that the one whose outside appearance is better than their inside, meaning their life outside the house is better than their life inside the house, then that means that person is a deceiver. That person is tricking people. But someone who's inside their private life is better than what they portray, what they show to the people outside, then that person is a muttaqi, that person is a person of taqwa, that person is close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to be careful of how we act, inshallah, in the house and outside the house. Also, Anas ibn Malik, like this hadith says, that he said, there's no one left of the people who prayed the two qiblas except for me. So Anas ibn Malik, they say that Rasulullah made dua, in one of the hadith comes, he made dua for him for barakah in his life and in his wealth, and he lived to over 100 years old. Some say 103, some say 120 years old. He lived for a long, and he had over 100 children and grandchildren, and he basically outlived a lot of them. Even before his grandchildren, he passed away after his grandchildren, some of his grandchildren. So you see the barakah from the dua of the Prophet ﷺ. So again, the two qiblas, Anas ibn Malik being one of the oldest, the last companions to pass away, and they said that he was buried when he was buried in Basra, I believe it was in Basra, which is in Iraq. He was buried with the staff of the Prophet ﷺ, which he obviously received from the Prophet ﷺ. The qibla within Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, hadith number 7. عن عبيد بن آدم رضي الله عنه قال سمعت عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه يقول لكعب رضي الله عنه أين ترى أن أصلي. When Umar was given the keys of Jerusalem, when he entered into Jerusalem, and the priests of Jerusalem gave him the keys, basically handed over Jerusalem to the Muslims, Umar he says, أين ترى أن أصلي. Where do you think I should pray? What advice do you give? Where should I pray? فقال إن أخذت عني صليت خلف الصخرة. That if you want to take my advice, you should pray behind the sakhra, the boulder, the rock. فكانت القدس كلها بين يديك. And then the whole Quds, the whole area of Jerusalem will be in front of you. فقال عمر رضي الله عنه ضحيت اليهودية. That this is this is similar to the opinions of the Yahud. لا ولكن أصلي حيث صلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. But instead I will pray where the Prophet ﷺ prayed. And this is referring to where the Prophet ﷺ prayed when he was Isra wal Mi'raj. He went to Jerusalem and Masjid Aqsa, and he led the 124,000 approximately Anbiya in prayer. So that was the honor the Prophet ﷺ received. He led them in prayer. So where he stood and where he prayed, that's where Umar he's referring to, that I will pray where the Prophet ﷺ prayed. فَتَقَدَّمْ إِلَى الْقِبْلَةِ وَصَلَّ ثُمَّ جَاءَ فَبَسَطَ رِدَاءَ فَكَنَسَ الْكُنَاسَ فِي رِدَاءِ وَكَنَسَ النَّاسِ. So Umar went forward, and this is the site, it's called the Qibli Masjid. So that's the Qibli Masjid. It's in, and one thing I didn't mention yesterday is that Masjid Aqsa is not just one building or one area or something. It's actually a huge sanctuary. The Haram of Jerusalem is actually the Aqsa Haram is about, they say, approximately 144,000 square meters. It's a pretty large area, and it includes about 200 structures, over 200 structures, including churches, synagogues, different buildings. For example, the church where Zakaria alayhi salam, where he was serving, where serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Maryam alayhi salam, where her room was, the hujra, where it was the one that's mentioned in the Quran. And so different buildings, and it has the Dome of the Rock, the famous Dome of the Rock where we see in the pictures with the golden dome. That's called Qubbat al-Sakhra. That's the Dome of the Rock, and that was actually built in the Umayyad dynasty. That was built over the dome, over the rock, and that was built later on after the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. The Qibli Masjid is also built later, but that's the area. That's basically where Umar radhiyallahu anhu prayed, and that is the Qibla of the place. That's where Rasulullah ﷺ prayed in Isra wal Mi'raj. So Umar radhiyallahu anhu did that, and after he was done praying, he went forward and he started cleaning. Remember, the area that's the area where Sulaiman alayhi salam built, the complex, and basically it was destroyed, and the Christians were using it out of their animosity towards the Jews. They were using it as a garbage dump. They just had garbage there. So Umar prayed, and then he started lifting and cleaning the area with his own, and then people followed suit. Next hadith, inshallah, hadith number 8. عن أم سلمة رضي الله عنها زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنها سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. Salama رضي الله عنها, the wife of Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, and she's also the one we talked about a month ago, before Hijrah. She was one of the first, her family was one of the first to attempt Hijrah, and Abu Salama رضي الله عنه and Salama رضي الله عنها, they attempted to do Hijrah, and we talked about how the family came and they told Abu Salama that you can go, but you're not taking our daughter. You're not taking your wife with you. And Abu Salama was forced to leave for Hijrah by himself, and Salama with their child Salama radhiyallahu anhuma, they both stayed. They were forced to stay back in Mecca, and she, over a year passed where she would go out every day to the outskirts of Mecca crying and making dua to Allah to take her to Mateen, to join her back with her husband. Not only that, her son, so after Abu Salama radhiyallahu anhu had gone, their child was taken away from her. So the family of the husband, they came and said, okay, you stopped your daughter from going, and we're going to take this child as ours. Basically, he's our grandchild. So they came and they forced him. And I talked about what happened to the arm. You guys remember? I talked about that. No? When they were jostling and fighting over the child, they actually dislocated the shoulder of the child while they were pulling them back and forth because of the fighting. So that was, she spent a whole year by herself, and then they had some rahm, they had some mercy on her. They joined her back with her child, and then after that she went to Medina Munawwara after a year after her husband. And then later on her husband passed away, and she became a wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Salama radhiyallahu anha. So she says, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, Man ahalla bi hajjatin aw umrah, that the one who makes the niyyah, makes tahleel, who makes intention for umrah, min al-Masjid al-Aqsa, from Masjid al-Aqsa ila al-Masjid al-Haram, from going from Jerusalem to Makkah, غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ, that all their sins will be forgiven, the past sins and the future sins will be forgiven for this person. أو قال, or the Prophet ﷺ said, وَجَبَتْ لَهُ الْجَنَّةِ, that Jannah has become wajib for that person. So this is one of the merits, the fada'il of Masjid al-Aqsa, is that if you go from there, if you go in many Umrah groups, I mean now it's COVID, but before the COVID, Umrah groups would take you for Hajj, for example, or for Umrah, and they would go to Jerusalem first, and they would visit Masjid al-Aqsa, and after visiting Masjid al-Aqsa, then they would do the Ihram, and they would go to Makkah Mukarramah, they would go Jeddah, and then go Makkah Mukarramah for Umrah or for Hajj. And this is the merits of that, is if you do that from Masjid al-Aqsa, all your sins will be forgiven. أو قال وجبت له الجنة, the Jannah has become wajib for that person. And there's another version of the hadith. This is in Sunnah ibn Abi Majah, Sunnah ibn Majah, rahimahullah. عن أم سلمة رضي الله عنها زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أهل بعمرة من بيت المقدس كانت له كفارة لما قبلها من الذنوب. So this is similar in wording, but basically similar in meaning that all the sins will be forgiven for that person. And we know that she says right after she narrates the hadith, she says فَخَرَجْت, meaning I went. She went specifically to Jerusalem to make ihram from there and come to perform Umrah. Also, Abdullah ibn Umar radhiallahu anhu, this is narrated by Imam Malik rahimahullah. He says that Abdullah ibn Umar radhiallahu anhu also went to Jerusalem and made ihram and came back for Umrah. So this is from the fadail of that. Another hadith number 9, the two qiblas combining on the Day of Judgment. I'm not sure of the authenticity of this hadith, I have to check exactly. But عن أبي بكر رضي الله عنه أظنه رفعه قال تحشر الكعبة إلى بيت المقدس متعلقا بأستارها كل من حج واعتمر. That on the Day of Judgment, the Kaaba and Masjid Aqsa will be combined together, and anyone who had gone for Umrah or Hajj will be holding on to the cloth or the covering of the Kaaba while that happens, or when that happens on the Day of Judgment. Okay, one more hadith inshallah, we'll finish. Hadith number 10, Masjid Al-Aqsa, one of the three masjids to be visited. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تشد الرحال إلا إلى ثلاثة مساجد. That the Prophet ﷺ said on the authority of Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, that journey should not be taken إلى ثلاثة مساجد, except for three masajid. Al-Masjid al-Haram, this is the Kaaba in Masjid in Makkah Mukarramah, wal Masjid al-Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Masjid Nabawi, wa Masjid al-Aqsa, and Masjid al-Aqsa. So these are the three that masjids that we shouldn't make a specific journey except for these three. Now the ulama have differed of what this means, because the ulama of the past had made not specific journeys as in mounting a camel and going out for that, but when you go to Masjid Nabawi, for example, when you go to Medina Munawwara, we know, for example, the hadith that we just talked about actually yesterday, Masjid Quba, that the Prophet ﷺ would go to Masjid Quba rakiban aw mashiyan. He would go to walking, riding or walking. He would go to Masjid Quba every week to pray in that. And he said that the one who makes wudu in his house and goes to pray in Masjid Quba will get the reward of an Umrah, a complete Umrah. So there's a little bit difference of opinion of what this means exactly, of what kind of journey this is, but specifically going to these three masajid, these are the merits of these three masajid, and these are the three harams of Islam. The first one being Masjid al-Haram, and we'll talk about inshallah the merits of praying in each one. So Masjid al-Haram is the first, you get 100,000 rewards of your prayers multiplied for the whole Haram sanctuary in Mecca. In Masjid Nabawi, 1,000 rewards. There is a hadith where it's mentioned 50,000, but 1,000 is the stronger opinion. And then another is Masjid Aqsa, the third Haram, where 500 rewards. Your one prayer in the Masjid Aqsa is multiplied by 500. So inshallah we'll continue on with this tomorrow after Dhuhr, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. جزاكم الله خير. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.